Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Forge, your place for gaming reviews, news, and content. Today we're going to be continuing the series of class guides for the Legendary Edition of the Mass Effect trilogy, and today's topic is going to be the Engineer. The Engineer is the tech powerhouse. Together with the Omni tool, there's nothing they can't hack, defend, or send out a combat drone. They receive all types of tech abilities in the first game. They gain a useful ally in the combat drone in Mass Effect 2, and in 3, they round out their arsenal by having a complete automated defense system. We'll go over all of these in more detail, so if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see more. With all that out of the way, let's start with Mass Effect 1, the Engineer. So in Mass Effect 1, the Engineer is a more supportive type role, more so than any other class. The Engineer is great at stripping enemy defenses while also having access to most of the locked chests on the overworld, bringing a lot of utility to any squad. The first ability we're going to talk about is their weapon of choice, the pistol. The pistol is the only upgradable weapon tree for the Engineer, and upgrading it gives you access to the basic armor tree as well as increasing the damage for the marksman ability. Overall, I didn't put many points into it because of the weapon varieties here in the Legendary Edition. I find having the versatility of other weapons way more useful than upgrading just pistols. Next up we have basic armor, and this one is a lifesaver in a lot of situations. Upgrading this gives you access to shield boost for its active ability, instantly starting the regeneration on your shields, and giving you just enough time to find a different cover spot, while the passive ability just increases the amount of damage reduction and the hardening stat, which helps prevent you from being affected by enemy biotics and other enemy tech attacks. The first tech ability for the Engineer is Decryption, giving you access to Sabotage and increasing the power of your proximity mine damage by using your other tech ability. Now what are these proximity mines, I hear you ask? Don't worry, I had no idea what they were either. I just thought these were colorful little things showing up on the map and I had no idea what they did. Now, these are mines that are placed anytime you use the active ability of any tech ability, Sabotage, Overload, or Damping. They trigger on enemies walking past them, so they are a great additional source of damage for the Engineer. As for the actual part of Sabotage, it is an ability that overheats enemies' weapons, making them unable to fire their guns for a certain amount of time. I usually use this against the most damaging enemy in the room, leaving them out of the fight until the smaller ones are dealt with. Next up, we have Hacking, passively reducing the cooldown on any of your mine placing abilities, while its active ability, AI Hacking, lets you hack a synthetic enemy and having them fight for you for a period of time. This ability is a godsend on missions with Geth. Just hack the biggest one you can, upgradable with rank 7 and 12, with the exceptions of Prime and Colossuses, and go to town on the other enemies. The next skill tree up is Electronics. Electronics increases the strength of your shields and the amount of hull restored when you repair the Mako. This talent grants the Overload ability, which damages enemies and shuts down their shields. As the only way to strip shields effectively, this ability needs to be upgraded fast on the Insanity difficulty. A lot of enemies have shielding, and bringing it down is paramount to survival. Damping is up next, and it increases the radius of your proximity mine powers, while its active ability helps bring down enemy biotics and tech users by making them completely unable to use their own powers. It's useful, but I only put a couple points into it, just enough that I can use the upgraded version, but enough to max out the tree. First Aid is our next skill tree, and it reduces the cooldown of using Metagel to restore your squad mate's health, and it increases the amount of health restored. It's useful if you plan on picking the medic specialization, otherwise I usually leave it untouched. Rather, I put first aid on a squad mate and have them do it. Medicine is our last main skill tree for the engineer, and it's very mediocre. Its active ability, the Neural Shock, is one of the only powers in the game to not receive cooldown reduction the more points you put into the tree, leaving it at its base 45 seconds the entire time. Passively, the skill tree reduces the cooldown on first aid, but overall, I don't put points into this one. The class tree for the engineer is a hub of decreasing recharge time for all of your tech powers and increasing your own resistance to enemy tech powers. Once you complete the mission on Luna, you receive an option to pick one of your class's two specializations, in this case, the medic and the operative. I find the operative to be way more useful in all situations on Insanity, increasing the effectiveness of Overload and Sabotage while further reducing the cooldown on other tech abilities. The Medic's option lets you increase the damage of Neural Shock by 40, and the duration is improved, while its max rank gives First Aid additional bonus healing, the ability to ignore toxic damage, and allows when you use Metagel to revive party members, instead of using Unity from the Spectre tree. I usually just go the route of increasing the point of the Spectre tree here in Mass Effect 1 to receive Unity, rather than going with the Medic. For a bonus talent, you have a wide variety of options. You could choose Barrier for added protection, or even choose a weapon specialty and increase your damage output and have an upgradable option for one of those weapons. But with all those powers out of the way, let's talk about how combat goes. Overall, here in Mass Effect 1, combat usually starts with laying proximity mines and trying to set up the field before the first gunshot is fired off. Disabling the biggest enemy, usually with Sabotage or AI hacking, helps you pick off the little ones, and then your entire squad can focus on the big threat. Using your tech powers repeatedly is how you get through most fight. Even if the enemy wasn't affected by the power itself, the proximity mine helps increase your DPS quite a lot. But who should be your squad mates for the engineer? As the engineer, you don't have a lot of damage output yourself, so bringing a heavy hitter like Rex, Garrus, or Ashley is a must. For the second member, Biotics is a great thing to look out for. Liara is the go-to choice, as Kaidan overlaps with a lot of the engineer's own abilities. For missions you know you're going to be facing heavy Geth, taking Tali is also a great option to be able to hack two enemies at once and have more tech abilities at your disposal. But with all that out of the way, let's move on to Mass Effect 2, where the engineer starts to become more specialized and becomes more of a tactician type character on the battlefield. Here in the second game, the engineer acts more like a back of the battlefield tactician-like commander, staying in the back, using drones and other powers to delay enemies so you or your squad can take them out. The engineer excels at taking away defenses, with barriers being the only one unable to be breached with a power from the base engineer. But starting out the list of said powers for Mass Effect 2, we have Overload, the best way to get rid of shields. It can also be used against synthetic enemies for straight damage against their health, and also explodes explosive containers and any flamethrower enemies, given that their armor is stripped here on Insanity. And what better way to get rid of that armor than by using Incinerate? It is very effective against armor, unshielded organic enemies, and it stops health regeneration on enemies like the Krogan and Forcha. It can arc around coverage, so be sure to aim just a little bit above to get those enemies a little toasty. Next up, we have the Combat Drone, the main ability of the engineer from this game on. It deploys a circular drone that follows an enemy and attacks. Once the drone attacks an enemy, the enemy will ignore all other targets and focus exclusively on the drone until it's destroyed. Because of the short cooldown on this power, an engineer can use it to lock up almost any single enemy by keeping a drone on it, attacking it continuously. It is an incredible distraction tool, and it saved my life very often in my playthrough. Next up, we have Cryoblast. By firing a blast of rapidly cooled subatomic particles, the engineer can freeze any target with a health bar, given that any other defenses are blasted away first. It's a lot more useful on lesser difficulties where every single enemy doesn't have a layer of added protection. But here on the Insanity difficulty, I don't recommend putting a lot of points into it unless you want to try to unlock the next ability. AI hacking is our last active ability for the engineer, letting you hack AI enemies and when upgraded, having them fight for you. I usually only put a single point here, with the engineer having so many other options. Just letting one less synthetic enemy attack you is usually enough for me. The passive class tree is the Tech Mastery tree, letting you increase your Paragon or Renegade scores, reducing your power recharge time, and increasing your health by a tiny amount. One of the biggest bones BioWare threw the engineer is help with reducing their cost on every single research project. This is special to this skill tree, and at its max rank reduces the cost of all projects by 25%. The pick of specializations here differ between wanting the maxed out reputation scores, and increased power duration, or having more power damage. I usually go with the first option. It brings more bang for your buck, especially with the added health. Bonus powers are a difficult decision, whether choosing something like Warp Ammo or Reeve to bring down barriers so the engineer can get rid of any defense, or having something like the Flashbang Grenade or Stasis just to provide a little bit more utility. You can't go wrong here. I personally used Warp Ammo just because I love the look of the ammo on the gun and having increased damage to enemies affected by biotics. And what a perfect way to talk about squad mates by choosing some that have biotics like Miranda, Thane, or Samara. Then rounding out the squad with a heavy hitter like Grunt, Zaid, or Garrus will bring the damage output needed on Insanity. Your heavy weapon depends on the mission at hand, with the Collector Particle Beam and the M920 Cane being most useful in almost any situation. For enemies with heavy shield usage or missions with a lot of synthetics, the Arc Projector can also be very useful. The one I personally used the most was the Black Storm. Shooting a mini black hole at enemies is just very satisfying, but also very damaging, and the crowd control is useful for moving to a different cover spot in the middle of a fight. But with Mass Effect 2 finished up, let's move on to the last game in the Legendary Edition with Mass Effect 3. Here in Mass Effect 3, the engineer has upgraded their tech arsenal to be a pain in any enemy's path. With every tech power available, along with a shiny new sentry turret, the engineer can control the battlefield no matter what stands in their way. The first skill tree up is Incinerate, a great way to stagger organic enemies and to shred armor. The main thing that has changed since Mass Effect 2 is the addition of tech combos, and the Incinerate Blast is a great way to get area damage off, with the primers being Carnage, Sentry Turret with the Flamethrower upgrade, and Incendiary Ammo. I evolved my Incinerate for the most target damage possible, because you can get radial damage off from the said tech combo. Next up, we have Overload, a must-have for the Insanity difficulty, and to get a lot of damage done to synthetics, and with the right upgrades, even organic enemies. My upgrade path for this one consisted of pure area increase, and with a Neural Shock upgrade at level 5 for a complete crowd control package. Cryoblast is up next, and while just putting 1 point in it was enough for the previous game, it is very potent here in Mass Effect 3. Being able to freeze unshielded, unarmored enemies is a great way to get rid of the smaller enemies in a pinch. It also immobilizes them while also amplifying whatever damage they receive. Partially frozen or chilled enemies are slowed instead of immobilized, but still receive the extra damage from attacks. This ability also weakens armor to subsequent damage. The upgrade path that worked the best for me was increasing the duration while also increasing the damage dealt to chilled targets. The signature combat drone is up next, and it receives some buffs from Mass Effect 2, doing more damage and being just a bit beefier. It will tag enemies and spawn right on your crosshair, distracting them and leaving them vulnerable to incoming fire or powers coming from your side of the field. I upgraded mine to be a little mobile powerhouse, with rockets, a short-ranged electrical attack, and a death detonation. This is the little drone that could, especially with how low the cooldown is. But to complement the drone is the addition of the next power, a sentry turret. Firing automatically at any enemies in its range. It pairs really well with the drone, because as the drone goes on the offensive distracting enemies and keeping enemies off you, having the turret near you helps bring any enemies that try to charge you into a hailfire of bullets. And with the last upgrades having rockets or a flamethrower. I went with a very close range build with mine, focusing on the flamethrower to stagger enemies as they got close to me, and protecting my flanks. Sabotage is our last main engineer ability, and it's a mixture of the old Sabotage from the first game and AI hacking from the second. But unlike the first game, it does not overheat enemy weapons. It sabotages enemies by having electrical charge backfire on enemies after 1.5 seconds that deals damage to any organic target. For synthetic targets, it just straight up hacks them, having them fight for you regardless of how powerful it is, whether it is an Atlas, a Geth Prime, you name it. Now, for bonus powers for the engineer here, you have a wide variety of options, and it depends on how you want to play. I went with armor piercing ammo for its passive ability, and any power upgrading ability works with increasing this ability's damage. Other good options for the engineer include Carnage to deal more damage to armor and health, Dark Channel to proc biotic combos from your squad mates, and a defensive power like Fortification for its power boosting capabilities. Now for squad mates here in Mass Effect 3, Liara is a great choice for bringing Singularity and Stasis. You can keep enemies crowd controlled for a very long period of time. One recommendation is the Bubble Stasis upgrade for her. It can stop phantoms in their tracks, and every other enemy as well. Edie and Kaidan also work well for proccing tech combos. Coupled with their fast recharge times, they make excellent choices to round out the engineer here in Mass Effect 3. Well, there we have it. A guide to the engineer class for the Insanity difficulty. I had trouble throughout the trilogy for this class. It definitely feels underpowered. It was difficult, but in the end, I persevered and beat it, all for you guys. Next up on the guides is the Infiltrator, and I have a feeling I should be able to get that guide out much quicker than this one. Thank you everyone for watching, and tell me down in the comments, what is your favorite class in the Mass Effect Legendary Edition? Have you played as an engineer? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to see more of these class guides, and I'll see you again next time.